Nadam se da ste se malo osvježili i probudili uz kavu i da možemo nastaviti s daljnjim programom. Malo izvan rasporeda, ali evo, pokušat ćemo nadoknaditi izgubljeno vrijeme. Sljedeći nam je na redu gospodin Mihael Jellinghaus iz Glavne uprave za pismeno prevođenje Europske komisije, koji će nam reći nešto više o CEF-ovoj platformi e-prevođenje.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Michael Jellinghaus, as she just said, and I welcome you back from the coffee break. I'm always more happy to speak in front of an audience that has just been fueled up on caffeine than one that's deprived of it. So I'm project manager of a part of the e-translation project, and I'm going to show you a little bit what it's all about. So before we had e-translation, we already had a machine translation project at the European Commission. It was called MT@EC. Was already launched in June 2013. It was trained on legislative texts and used a technology called statistical machine translation with a toolkit called Moses. I'm going to tell you a bit more about that later on. Then it became e-translation. E-translation itself was launched in July 2017 as a web service for Snippets, and in November also as a web page for document translation. It is based on cloud computing, and we now use, instead of statistical machine translation, we use neural machine translation technology. And later on, I'm going to tell you a bit more what it is, what the differences are. So you've already heard about CEF-AT in a number of the previous presentations, so I'm not going to go more into this. At a glance, e-translation is available both for individuals who can submit documents or simply text snippets through a web page, and it's also available for machine-to-machine use. So if there are applications that want to have a multilingual version of their website, they can use e-translation, connect to it automatically. The users are, well, it started off as a tool for EU translators. It was opened up to other staff of the European institutions. Then there are these famous DSIs that you've heard about in the previous presentations, the digital service infrastructures, like, for example, the electronic exchange of social security information, the online dispute resolution, open data portal, e-justice portal, and a few more. Then there are some users that are system suppliers. So EURLEX is a database of European legislation. NLEX is a database of national legislation of the member states. We have an internal market information that's also been mentioned before, and so on. And then finally, and that I think is the case for most of you in the audience today, individuals who work for the public administrations of the member states. Obviously, the benefits, I don't know if I have to repeat it again. If you use machine translation, a translator can optimally be faster and more productive, translate more documents. It should reduce the costs, and it facilitates information exchange, just that people can exchange information in different languages more easily. Now, I know this is a bit small. This is a screenshot of the web interface for snippets translation. So when you simply have a short text to translate, you can input it in one window here. The translation will appear on the other side. There's also a little checkbox where you can say, email me my translation. So then you will get the translation also in your inbox. You simply choose a source language and the target language. Then there's a number of domains you can choose. And for Croatian, I would recommend you to just keep the default setting called Cutting Edge, which is the newest neural machine translation technology. All the others are maybe not relevant at this point. So this is for snippet translation. And then we have a little, well, you can change tabs up here where you can translate documents. We support a number of different formats, Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, PDFs, open office formats, rich text, HTML, maybe a few more that I forgot. Again, you just choose your source language. Then there will be a number of target languages displayed here, and you can select one or more of them. Again, the domain you can choose. The output format is either same as source, so if you submit a Word document, you will get a Word document, or you can get TMX or XLIF files. By default, you get an email with your translation as well, because it takes a bit longer for documents, and you might want to keep the documents you get rather than just delete them. And there's a checkbox here which says delete after download. So if we have a lot of security in place, but if you're extra careful about your document, then you can ask for it being deleted from our servers immediately after delivery. Now, here's a typical document. If you submit it to our program, you get it back in another language, French in this case, and you see it looks the same, it's just in another language. So the idea is really that you submit a document, you get it back in another language. You can submit one original and get it back in many languages. We currently support all of the 24 official languages of the European Union, plus Norwegian and Icelandic. These countries also contribute. You can translate many documents at once, so you don't have to wait for one document translation to come back before you can launch another one. And e-translation, this is a major selling point, I think, protects your privacy. So all the documents are automatically deleted after 24 hours, or if you tick that little checkbox immediately after delivery. Why do we keep them for 24 hours? Well, that's simply for debugging. If you report a problem with a document, if the document is no longer there, we can't try to find out what the problem was. Then, really important, the intellectual property rights are transferred to the user. So your translation belongs to you. This should be obvious, but if you have ever read the terms of the online translation services like Google Translate and whatnot, you will be surprised. You actually sell your soul, and they can do with the document that you submit whatever they want. So in the case of e-translation, you can be sure that no one is looking at your translations. I like the slide. I didn't make it. We have all sorts of security measures in place so that you can be sure nobody will have access to your documents. Now, one example of an application that uses e-translation. This is NLEX, the portal for accessing member state legislation. There's also Croatia, for example, is here. But in our example, let's assume that we want to find out something about social security in Lithuania. We happen to not speak Lithuanian. So we click on Lithuania, and then on the next side, we want to search for the keyword social security. Now, if you know it already in Lithuanian, you put it in Lithuanian. If you don't, you type it in English, click on the little translate button, and it will give you the Lithuanian keywords. You can search the database in that language. And that doesn't only work for Lithuanian, but also for the other languages. Yeah, here it is. Now, a second example. This is the European data portal. We've talked about open data before. It's a big collection of data from the member states. There's a little text field where you can enter keywords. Now, this time you can simply enter them in any language you want to search. Let's say that we are a Greek user who wants to know something about census in Poland. So you enter the Greek term, apografii Polonia, and it will search, which means census Poland, and it will search the database and show you the results. Now, the results originally were in Polish. You search for it in Greek, and they are displayed in English here. If you then click on one of the documents, you get a summary, which is also machine translated into English, and you can select from a drop-down menu which language you want to have this displayed on, and there's Croatian. So you could search for documents from the Open Data Portal and get the results translated in your language. Now, this was an example of how the machine-to-machine service is used. If you want to use it as an individual, or if you have your own application in a public administration, some ministry, some public service, if you want to have this automatic machine translation also, you should send an email to this email address here, cefat@ec.europa.eu. Briefly describe what you want to do, and we will then provide you with the technical documentation and all other information. So this is an important email address of our help desk. If as an individual you also just want to use it, send an email to this address and register there. And there you go. You can adapt your service to multilingual use. Now, a little bit about the technology behind e-translation. I mentioned on the very first slide that the old system, MTITC, was based on statistical machine translation. MTITC was built on the data contained in the Euromis database. So it contains all the translations by the translators of the European institutions. It's mainly legislative texts. It covers all the 24 languages. And yeah, as I said, it covers EU policy subjects and language. But it also means that it's very limited when it comes to everyday language. So my favorite example is always that in our legislative texts, you never see first-person pronouns. It never says I or we. So that just doesn't appear in laws, maybe in a monarchy, but not in the data that we have. So if you want to use the system to translate anything where you say I do this, I do that, our system won't currently give you very good results. It's MTITC was based on a toolkit called Moses, and it performs best when trained on large volumes of text pairs between the source and the translated in specific domains. Now, this is the past. E-translation is based on neural machine translation technology. You have most probably heard about the buzzwords of artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, and so on. This is how neural machine translation works. We train artificial neural networks on existing translations. Again, we have a selection of previous translations. And when I say an artificial neural networks, you can imagine that we try to train it in the same way that the human brain adapts to a task. So my example is always that my little daughter is currently learning to walk. And the first time, of course, she failed miserably. She fell down. But then she maybe tried to adapt the parameters in IT speak. So she maybe leaned a bit more to the left or did it a bit more slowly. And then suddenly she stood for a second. And Daddy was really happy, clapped his hands. And the child remembered, okay, these settings are helpful. I will remember them and try it again like this. And then the human brain gradually tries to find the best settings for accomplishing a task. And the same is for translation. So in the beginning, the system will produce a really crap translation that is not very close to the reference translation, but it might get, just by chance, close to the reference translation. And then the weights that led to this translation are reinforced. And that's how the system then gradually, it translates millions of times the same sentence, and it will get translations that are much and more closer to the reference translation. And in the end, you have a system that works reasonably well and better than the statistical approach that we used before. So the computer devises its own rules on how to translate, and it's really, as I said, a radical departure from the phrase-based SMT approaches. This paradigm shift only happened in the past 2 years, so it's a very recent development, but our system is already using the most recent scientific results. So why is it important? The neural machine translations read much better. They're more fluent, more grammatical. The system is better able to fill in gaps in data use for the training. So under the old statistical machine translation system, when there was an unknown word that it hadn't seen before, it just kept it as it was in the original. And an unknown word could also be just an inflected form of a known word. So if you have, I don't know, case endings or other inflections, then the statistical system treats it as an unknown word. The neural system, on the other hand, can generalize a bit. It can say, okay, I've already seen the stem of that word. I've seen this ending, not in that combination, but it can then find out how to best translate this. And another thing is, for example, for compound words. So some languages take two nouns and put them together, and the combination might not have been seen in the training data, but the neural system can then guess from the two components how to translate the combination. This works much better for the highly inflected languages like German and Hungarian. Croatian, as most of the other Slavic languages, is somewhere in the middle, but it also, NMT works better for Croatian than SMT. And this is really where the field is headed. So I've recently been to a scientific conference on machine translation, and hardly anyone speaks about SMT anymore. Will it become obsolete? We'll see. Maybe we'll find some hybrid solutions that work even better, but the tendency is that neural machine translation really is here to stay and has changed the field. So we started with a limited set, and then since June 2018 we have neural machine translation for all of the language pairs, the pairs with English. And I'll give you an example of what the translations look like from both the statistical system and the neural system. So here is a text that is, it's not legal text, so not the same as the training data. It's a press release from the European Union. Starting in 1980, the European Union gradually adopted legislation putting an end to the diverging schedules of the national clock changes. In 2018, however, the purpose of clock changes has become much less relevant, with studies suggesting that energy savings are now marginal and citizens increasingly complaining about negative health impacts. Now, let's see first the old system, the bad system. There you go. So I unfortunately don't speak any Croatian, and I apologize for giving the presentation in English, but I asked a colleague translator of mine to tell me everything that's wrong with this sentence, and she said, well, it's almost every word. So it's, yeah, this one is a bit jumbled. There are problems with inflections, word order, and so on. Now here's the neural translation. I cannot judge myself, but I have been told by my colleague that it reads better. That there are a few problems with the terminology and the verb tense, but she said yes, the NMT is better. I hope you agree. She didn't just tell me something wrong. This was one example. Now, I always take a little text about the country where we give this presentation in the workshops. Croatia's coast is speckled with a multitude of islands, each with its own special appeal. Here is the statistical one. Okay, you laugh. That confirms what the translator told me. And here's the neural one. You're not laughing. Okay, good. So the English word appeal has multiple meanings. It picked the wrong one, also for NMT, but yeah. Now, here's another one. Visiting small islands and larger hotspots. A tour of the magnificent islands in the Adriatic along Croatia's Dalmatian coast is one of the chief delights of a visit to the country. SMT is here. NMT is not perfect either. So you see the word hotspots. It has multiple meanings, and this one maybe appeared in the news a bit more recently. You see this about the refugee centers, so that's how it translated hotspots here. It thought that it might sound nicer to put republic here. It's not in the original, so it's a translation mistake. And the word delights was translated incorrectly again. So you see, you don't see the same type of errors in SMT and NMT. The tendency is that NMT provides better results. It's not perfect, it still needs to be checked. There are some more error types that we haven't seen in these examples. Sometimes neural machine translation makes up words, so that can happen. It invents words that don't exist. But all the examples I've shown you now are out of domain, so they are not legal text. This is not what our system was built for. Here's an example what it looks like when you translate in-domain text. So if you find the Croatian easy to read, difficult to read, and difficult to understand, then it matches the English original. Here you see why it is so important that you should have in-domain data to train the system. So if we had a big database of tourism-related texts in our training data, I think we would have done better on the previous examples. Language resources, as I said, are really the key to success. So we need more data for all languages, even more so for Croatian, because Croatia only joined the European Union recently. We have, well, out of all of the 24 languages, we have the most for English and French, obviously. The one where we have the least is Irish Gaelic, because there are simply not so many translators and translations available. But Croatia is next. And Croatia is only half of the third to last language. So we have much less training data. If we have more, we can produce better translations. It's also important for obtaining a better lexical coverage to remedy the problem of unknown words. And and as I said, domain data, in-domain data is also important. We can adapt the system to your domain. If you work in fisheries or I don't know what, then we could potentially build a system adapt to that subject matter. Now, in summary, CEF-AT retranslation brings reliable and trustworthy translations for the European institutions and for national public administrations. It supports languages with fewer speakers. Just as an example, Irish Gaelic gets the same attention as the other languages from our system. Google Translate, for example, won't have any interest in supporting such a tiny community where everyone speaks English anyway. Croatia is in the middle. CEF-AT provides opportunities for the private sector. We've heard about this morning. Creates a higher profile for the language technologies. And I think in the afternoon we will hear a bit more from Professor Piperidis about the public availability of the data collected. So, e-translation provides you with an opportunity to solve your language problems, and I thank you very much for your attention. Now, I think there's time for questions, or should... Okay.
Okay, I think it works. Natasha Pavlovic from the University of Zagreb. I just wanted to ask you about some details about the text, the data that the system was trained on. Was it only the legislation or only the EU-related text, or have you already used some external data that was perhaps provided by external sources, let's say, and also about the chances to get involved in this domain adaptation from people, like external projects and things like that. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So it's a good question. The system that we provide on our the generic system that we provide has only been trained with EU data from our Euramis database so far. But we have also a couple of domain-adapted engines available already. So some of the DSIs or also national administrations provided us with in-domain data, and we built a domain-adapted engine that you can then select where you have the domain. It has cutting-edge default, but if you open the drop-down menu, there are a few domain-adapted engines already. So one is cultural, where we got data from Europeana. We have, I don't know, financial, where we got some data. But we're happy for any data, and ELRC is happy about getting any data. And then, I mean, on a case-to-case basis, we can see how much it will help in building a domain-adapted engine. And this year, just to finish, we are focusing a lot on building a generic domain engine. So the idea is that we will have the EU domain engine, and a generic domain engine that is more suitable for, I don't know, if you want to translate a newspaper text or something like this. So we're trying to get a bit less restricted to the EU domain.
Hi, I'm Bakaric from University of Rijeka. Is there a way to make the service accessible to students of translation studies?
Thank you. So I provided this email address before, cef@eceuropa.eu. That's our help desk. They can definitely answer that question. We have rules, and I don't remember them in detail. I know that we provide access to some translation studies courses. but I think they are all part of this European Master in Translation. There's like a network, but I would recommend you to contact the help desk. Just ask for the access, and then we will see it.
Ponovo Damir Pavuna, Integra. Mene interesira prije svega, što se tiče strojnog...
Okay, I have to go.
Do you want me to speak English?
It's easier.
Okay, I can. First question, I have few questions. First question is, what are the criteria you said you used for neural machine translation learning? You used EU legislation. And do you plan to go forward to other domains? Or, and why? What is the criteria for your advancing to another domain?
Yeah, okay. That's another good question. It mainly depends on, well, it's two factors. One is the need of our users. So if we get the signal from public administration somewhere that they need an engine for a certain domain, we will then try to provide a solution for that. The other criterion is data availability. So if you want to have a domain-adapted engine for a certain domain, but there's no training data available for it, then it will be very difficult for us to train it. So it's the needs of the users and the training data availability that determine it.
I would like to argue about the price of machine translation, because you said it is very cheap, let's say, but you must be aware of the fact that if you want a good translation, you need post-editing,
yeah,
which is very expensive. So this is also a question of criteria. When to use post-editing and when not. Mm-hmm. You leave it to, let's say, to a person that wants to use machine translation. But what is about responsibility for the translation?
Yeah, so we provide machine translation as a help for users and as a help for translators. We do not guarantee any quality of translation. So if it's an important translation, you have to make sure that a human checks it. So from our side, we provide what we can, but we also know that there's no guarantee that it's a good translation. Now, you mentioned the cost. You said that post-editing is expensive. Again, there it depends on the quality of the machine translation. So nobody would be doing post-editing if translation without the help of machine translation were easier and cheaper. So you have to find a balance as a translator on when you use machine translation. It depends on the language pair. It depends on the domain, whether it's covered or not. But basically, it's the translators with their experience who can judge when it makes sense to post-edit a machine translation and when it makes sense to ignore it and translate without the help of it. So you need experienced translators. And okay, I didn't think this was necessary to state it explicitly again, but we are not aiming at replacing translators. We are trying to provide a tool that translators can use to make their work more efficient. And we're also aiming to provide a tool for people who maybe just want to understand what a website is about or something like this, and where it's not necessary to send the whole website to a translator instead. So you get a first idea maybe, and then you decide which parts are important and you would like to send to a human translation. Thank you very much.